Welcome to Luvbites. Luvbites. By Dr. Tara, your destination for sexual wellness and mindful relationship advice. Hope you're having an orgasmic day.
Hello, all my loves. Today, I have a very special guest, and I have seen her talks, I have seen her work, and I'm just so stoked that she's here with us to share the sexy wisdom that she has of all these years of working in the sex and intimacy realm. Today, we have with us Dr. Jennifer Gonzalez, who is a sociologist and the author of From Madness to Mindfulness, Reinventing Sex for Women. And you guys know how much I love mindfulness and how much I advocate for it. So I'm so excited to be talking to Dr. Jen. Dr. Jen also has had a private practice as an intimacy and relationship coach for the past 14 years. She is an international speaker. I mean, she's spoken all over the world about sex, about relationship, about mindful intimacy. So thank you so much for being on our podcast today, Dr. Jen.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm excited. To jump into topics of sex and pleasure and intimacy and all the juicy stuff.
Yes. Well, the pleasure is all mine. I'm sure this will be a very stimulating conversation.
I've been talking about these topics forever, but I still giggle like a 12-year-old boy. I like double entendres. Like it's just funny. Like it's always just
I love it. I love that it's like a happy, positive topic to chat.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit more about you?
Yeah. So, I mean, my PhD is in sociology. So I always have that as a foundation for my work and approaching sex and relationship topics, which is like looking at what did you learn where did you grow up? What did you learn growing up? What did you learn about sex, masturbation? What did you not learn? Was there shame? What did you learn through religion, your family, school? And what, how did that create your story of who you are or who you think you should be? Because that around sex just gets in the way of so much good sex as adults. Because in general, we're just and I know, I'm a sociologist and based in the United States, so this is the culture I know the best. We have, particularly for women, but overall, just a lot of shame and stigma and embarrassment around sexual topics, despite plastering it everywhere and using it to sell things. That's not frank, honest, vulnerable conversations around sex. So what I do with that is a bunch of things. I do video work and writing. I have a private practice with individuals and couples, and that's everything from body image to communication, to couples in long-term relationships with mismatched desire levels, because that's incredibly common. Overcoming shame, all sorts of topics with folks of all ages. And then my real passion is, like you said, the traveling and public speaking, which was a bit gutted during COVID times, but is coming back happily.
Yes.
So, because that's, and I love going to, I just had a call this morning with somebody actually in Kentucky. And we were talking about, okay, what is it to give a sex talk in the Bible Belt?
Yeah.
And what's acceptable and what's not, and how do we pitch it to folks to make sure they want to come in the door in the first place and then not feel offended, but get hey, this is really valuable. We need to talk about these topics.
Yeah, still get that sex knowledge, but maybe it's, transferred or translated in ways that is easy to understand for certain demographics, right?
Yeah, well, and I think because I think so much, when folks think sex education, they think graphic, maybe they think salacious, they think just overt, and but avoiding sex topics is not going to help you in any relationship have a happy, healthy, intimacy with your partner. So it's folks need to have the courage to be able to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
But this is, this type of discomfort is what leads to greater happiness and connection and expression in the long run.
Yes.
And I mean, that's all my work is all around mindfulness, integrating mindfulness and compassion into sex and relationships, and realizing hey, we all carry ickiness around sex topics. We've been rejected before. We felt like our body isn't good enough, or we didn't have an erection that we wanted at the right time. And we can carry that as armor over ourselves to protect ourselves and to hide out. And I teach people how to dismantle that armor so they can really show up and have the depth of raw, real vulnerability and intimacy that we're all seeking from other humans, but is really scary to go to.
Yes. And I love that you said that because I love that you bring this like different perspectives and factors to consider on the various sex topics. And I saw that your recent speech was about great sex. So I really want us to talk about these different perspectives, things to consider, different factors. So my question for you is, and this is more like an umbrella question. What is great sex?
Yeah. Well, so I want to start with what is not great sex.
Yes. Let's falsify things, right?
Well, because I think the reason I start there, and so the talk you're talking about was a recent talk I gave at a college, actually at my alma mater, which was great, at Lehigh University. And so I was specifically targeting college students and young adults. And so this talk is specific to them, but the overall topic of great sex is the same for all of us. But specifically when I was talking to them about what is great sex not, or what have you learned is great sex, but really isn't. And the foundational place is porn. You know, that you're learning through watching porn that sex doesn't require communication. People have perfect bodies. You know, that it's about, performing for another person. It's all about the actions and the positions. Consent isn't required because, of course, whatever you want to do is what the other person wants to do. You know, you don't have to talk about STIs or pregnancy or anything like that. All of that is what we're seeing as a main model of what sex is. And research is continually showing that, the more folks are exposed to that, the more they think, younger generations, that's what good sex is. Because how would you know any different? And so that's my starting point. And then talking about, what is good sex? Well, this piece I was already talking about, this vulnerability piece, like realizing that you've got fears and that you are trying to perform for someone else as a way of like doing what you think is right, but also hiding or protecting your emotions because you don't want to feel rejected. You don't want to do something wrong. That doesn't make for good sex. That makes for disconnected performance. Sex.
Right. Yeah, totally. And, I like saying, stop trying to look sexy and feel sexy instead.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so that is especially when I'm working with women. It's interesting because more and more, when I talk to college women, I'm getting more the question of like, well, how, I was like, you want to do what feels good to you and what gives you pleasure. And they're like, how do I know what feels good?
Right.
And I think, if we'd gone back 20 years ago, I don't think folks would have been saying that in the same way.
Right.
But because of porn and because of social media, we so often step back and are always objective or trying to objectively look at ourselves through the eyes of others. But that means we are not subjectively embodied in the moment and experiencing our own sensations and our own pleasures and what's that feel like in my groin right now? And my clit is throbbing and I'm feeling flushed and this feels amazing. And I'm excited in that you really get lost in the moment, the organic moment of connecting with someone else. That's not about performing certain positions and looking a certain way.
Right.
And checking the box. Like, okay, we did this. Now we have to go to a blowjob. Now we have to do this and I have to look this way. And that's all like in our head. And it's not in our heart and it's not embodied, in our crotch.
Yeah. A lot of times it's like the feeling and the sensation. Last month, I had the honor to give my first TED Talk.
Yay.
And I was able to talk about my study that was based on 5,000 participants. And you'll like this and you can cite this as well because you're already talking about this. I created a model and there was a significant prediction. So sexual mindfulness is one of the strongest predictor of sexual satisfaction.
Yeah. And how are you measuring sexual mindfulness?
It is through a multi-dimensional questionnaire.
Yeah.
So all of this research is cross-sectional survey. So that's the limitation.
Yeah.
However, I do think it doesn't discount the fact that it is a significant with huge effect size.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really important. And there are experimental research out there by really distinguished researchers that created sexual mindfulness therapy.
Yeah.
Like
Lori
an
Brotto
intervention.
out of
Yes, like Dr.
Vancouver.
Brotto.
Fantastic work. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So there's all of that that shows the improvement in all kinds of things like desires, like stimulation and the wanting as well, and arousal, right? So there's that portion of like smaller sample size, but like experimental data that is amazing.
That's awesome.
I just wanted to like add to
Yay.
this literature by showing,
Ugh.
okay, even with a survey of a ton of people, it shows how important it is, and it's time to be talking about it way more.
Well, so first of all, yay! Thank you for doing this research too. I am so excited to read it and cite you, because this is, I mean, I've been doing sexual mindfulness work for like 15 years.
You have, and that's why I'm so excited that you're here. You wrote that book. I read that book.
Yay! Thank you.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I still think though, I think people still misunderstand what mindfulness is. I still think they think it's more in your mind and focusing on something. And like mindfulness is being present with whatever shows up in the moment and noticing what's happening inside of us, like where we're feeling sensations, where we're feeling emotions, what stories we're telling ourselves, what our thoughts are. And then also being attuned and noticing what's happening outside of you and not reacting to it. Not whatever, however, if something triggers you or makes you feel insecure about body image or anything, you notice all of that and then stay present. And then to be able to stay present like that and observe that, we judge ourselves less. We judge our partners less. We're more attuned to our bodies and our own pleasure then you know what feels good and what doesn't. We tend to feel more, when we cultivate mindfulness, we're more comfortable being vulnerable and therefore communicating about uncomfortable sexual topics.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of I think the main components of great sex is like, you have to be able to talk. You have to be able to be socially awkward with the person that's in front of you in your communication. And it feels icky inside. It's scary. We're innately social creatures as humans.
Yes.
So anything that makes us feel like we could be rejected, or that somebody we like might not like us, it feels so icky. And I think that's primarily what gets in the way of people actually talking about what they need to be talking about sexually.
Yes. So what is great sex? Great sex involves the ability to communicate about sex with your partner.
Yeah. And so communicate truly what's going on for you. So when you have to be attuned to what's going on for your needs, your wants, what feels good, what doesn't. Notice your fears in communicating.
All of that needs a lot of introspection though, right?
Yes, so much. And that's the mindfulness practice.
Yeah, mindfulness practices and journaling.
Yes, and meditation. And then, I use, like a triangle I can hold up here for you of like, always checking if you feel triggered in any moment. Like what are your thoughts? What are your emotions? And what are your bodily sensations? Where are you feeling it inside of you, as a way of anchoring yourself to the moment and then being like, okay, I know what my pattern is here. How do I make a different choice that's healthier for me? Like that's, practicing mindfulness and then applying it to improve your relationships, sex lives. So yeah. So great sex requires us knowing ourselves, knowing we have a right to have our needs met also. And that's, especially for women, depending on how and where they were raised, we're often raised with like, you put the needs of others first.
Yeah.
And so your needs shouldn't matter that much.
Right.
But, many other folks carry that as well. So, all of that piece. And then how do you communicate it in a way that you're not shaming or blaming the person in front of you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I know folks try this sometimes and the person on the receiving end of it is, it feels bad. But so anyway, yeah. So it's learning that skill and how to create a safe space in your communication, and that someone else then can communicate back to you. And even if it's uncomfortable to you, you're responsible with how you respond to it. And then what is great sex? It's what's great to each individual person and whoever they're with, what feels sensual, what feels pleasurable, what
yeah, because like for some couples it might be super kinky stuff, but for some other it might be really slow, like tantra. Like
yeah, exactly.
So
and
it
maybe
just so depends.
Yeah. And sometimes I know, like, again, my specialty area is women, cisgender women who were assigned female at birth and were raised with all of those gender stereotypes projected on them, and
Mm-hmm.
live as adult women. Um yeah, there's so many layers to that.
Yeah.
Of what you've learned along the way, and how to pull back those layers. So yeah, and yeah. I was like, there's so many directions to go. Sorry, go.
It's so true. And I mean, it is quite a huge question to tackle. Like, what is great sex? But
Yeah.
we have talked about the mindfulness, sexual mindfulness stuff, about learning about your body, your preferences, your likes and dislikes, and start practicing mindful practices. So,
Yeah, and
what
like
are
mindful masturbation is a really good
yes.
place to start and practice. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I had an episode about that. So, hey, loves,
Oh,
definitely listen to that episode on mindful masturbation.
awesome.
And then we talked about what is great sex. Great sex is also involved the ability to communicate with your partner. So, as you were describing all of that, one thing that you said was about the desire discrepancy
Yeah.
related to like the issues, like how do we communicate sexual issues or our preferences or things that we perhaps like or didn't like that our partner did.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I educate my students, I always talk about, have so much empathy as you talk about things you didn't like, because sex is such like a vulnerable, like insecure, like
Yeah.
based topic where
Yeah.
if you said maybe some things in a harsh way, it could
Yeah.
stay with that person a long time,
Yes.
right? So one of the questions that I typically get on my TikTok is like, how do I talk to them? Like, how do I talk to her? How do I talk to them?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two different approaches. One is when you're in the moment, if somebody's doing something that doesn't feel like quite right for you, or you want them to do something different, maybe it's just to gently guide their hand, or
Mm-hmm.
gently move them, or be like, hey, can I shift a little bit? That feels a little uncomfortable to me.
Mm-hmm.
You just take ownership, because it's right. It's showing up to you in a way that's not what you're looking for. So just,
Mm-hmm.
and the more normal that is, the happier. I mean, because you don't want anybody who's like just enduring pain, or isn't getting pleasure, or isn't
Right.
happy but keeps going along with it because they
Right.
don't want to disrupt their partner. So,
Yeah.
just in the moment, gently give it. And if that's not saying you're doing this wrong, or ow,
No.
stop that, or something, and be like, oh, hey, can we shift? And I think one thing to know is too, what worked last week may not work this week, because
Mm-hmm.
our bodies are always changing. And
Mm-hmm.
women with menstrual cycles and shifting, and that are literally, our uterus and our cervix can shift throughout
Right.
the month.
Yeah.
How tired you are, how hydrated you are, how well you ate, how stressed you are, how distracted you are. All of these things impact
Mm-hmm.
how much we can drop into a sexual moment or not. So just know, like, there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing broken with you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, if it can always be an organic exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And then otherwise, I always tell people, use me as your excuse. Then
Yes.
over like breakfast one morning, or over, a happy hour or something, be like, hey, I was listening to this podcast, or I read this book, or I read this article, or my friend sent this thing to me, and it was about this topic.
Uh-huh.
And so instead of talking about what's not working, talk about how you want to shift things, like in a positive
Yes.
way. So because it's hard for us to not get defensive if our partner is
Mm-hmm.
telling us like, you suck, or
Right,
you
right.
you
Well,
like
you're really
that.
bad at giving head.
I
Whoops.
know. I
Like,
know. You're
I've been
like,
doing all this work for this long.
I know, exactly. And then you feel there's so many levels of embarrassment. And then it's just
Yeah.
hard to want to show up again and try it again.
Yeah.
So instead, saying, hey, I was reading this thing, I didn't even know this was a thing, or da da da. Can
Mhm.
we
Can we
try this?
try?
Yes, it's perfect. I mean, and it's genuine. So it's like framing it in the positive, and framing it as a team together
Mhm.
instead of finger pointing.
Mhm.
So you take ownership of like, hey, I'd love this. Can we try
Mhm.
this together?
Mhm.
There's no, blaming or shaming
Mhm.
involved, but that requires, thinking, and sometimes I tell folks, if you're afraid you're not going to say it right, put it in a text. Put it, put it in an
Yes.
email
Yeah.
where you get to think about it. And then your partner also gets to reflect on it and not feel put on the spot.
Mhm.
So we're send an article, be like, I was reading this thing and this is like, can we talk about this? We don't have to
Yeah.
do it, but I'm curious to at least talk about it.
I love that advice. I love that advice. Another barrier to great sex that a lot of my followers have told me is the lack of sexual initiation from one partner in a relationship.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that falls in line with one of my specialty areas of couples with mismatched desire levels in
Yeah.
long-term relationships. So
Yeah.
it can be hard for the lower desire person to initiate anything sexual because they're not feeling sexual, they're not feeling much desire. They're also often can be afraid that if they start something, but then their body doesn't kick in or they don't feel like doing it, they're just going to disappoint their partner again or more. So they will maybe avoid initiating that way. There's also can be a lot of shame. If you carry shame or embarrassment around sex, that like you're not going to do it right.
Right.
So, but then, it's then obviously the unfair weight on the person who has higher desire, and that's always initiating, and then they're opening themselves up to be rejected, which is so vulnerable. And at some point, people will
Yes.
just stop trying sometimes,
Yes.
even though they're not happy with it. So, I suggest, one of the things I suggest is that couples start using a 0 to 5 rating system. I like to take like abstract concepts and boil them down to something, operational.
Oh, you're
So,
speaking my language. I'm a
I know.
quantitative researcher.
That's why I just said that. I was like, oh, you're going to appreciate this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and so that would be like, the one of the people can go to the other person. It doesn't matter higher desire, lower desire, and be like, hey, tonight I was thinking, it's been a little while. I'm feeling like a 4 out of 5. Where are you on the scale? And so basically what they're first of all, they have to attune themselves and be like, okay, am I a 0 that I want 0 touch with my partner? I don't want anything. But am I like a 2 where I would like some cuddling and maybe some massage? And if I can relax and get out of my head and get present in my body and we put our cell phones away, my body will probably respond and open up. Or am I also like a 4 or a 5 and like, yeah, game on. Hold on. Let me put the kids down to sleep or let me finish this, this paper I'm working on. And I'll meet you in a half hour in the bedroom, And so, but it's also, it seems easier for the initiator. Because they're not actually like starting something to get rejected. They're putting it out there. And then the lower desire person can check in and be like, okay, wow, why am I always a 0 or a 1? What can I do? And what can I do for myself to maybe get myself to a 2 or a 3? And maybe they start fantasizing about something sexy, or they read some erotica, or they pull out their vibrator for a few minutes and just get their body primed. I call it priming your own pump. And get yourself started. And then you could come back to your partner and be like, yeah. And you
feeling
say,
sexy.
Like, yeah. You're like, okay, let's do this. Yeah. And another thing is if you are the person who never initiates, and part of it is because you don't know how to do it. I facilitate them. That's one of the things I like to facilitate between couples, like asking the other person, like, how do you want them to initiate?
Right.
And then sometimes they're like, I just grab my crotch, but otherwise they may be like, oh, I'd like us to connect a little bit, talk about our days while we're maybe holding hands, start kissing my neck, start kissing up to my ear, like they want those aspects of it and warming up in that way and connecting. Which is literally because it's easier to initiate when you know what your partner wants.
Totally. So like a lot of this to me, like comes down to the ability to communicate and communication.
And communicate clearly and effectively and kindly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would you say if someone tells you, okay, I have told my partner so many times that I would love to have more regular sex with you and they still have no desire and not initiating ever?
Yeah.
Like, what would happen to that?
I mean, yeah. So I work with those couples a lot because they're like, okay, we need to, so one thing is seek out a coach, a counselor, a therapist, because often it's hard, right? If you don't feel desire, and you've got a busy life and priorities and otherwise feel connected in your relationship, it's like somebody's telling you need to eat and you're like, I'm not hungry. Why would I go eat if I'm not hungry? So and because we only know that version of desire pretty much in our society, that it's supposed to be spontaneous. And then you have sex together. Well, for many folks in long-term relationships, they don't have spontaneous desire. They have responsive desire. And that requires cultivation. And it requires more teamwork and taking responsibility for our own desire and our partner knowing their role in that. So, what was the question exactly?
I was gonna say the word that Gen Z's use, like, you got to get me in the vibe.
Yeah. But it is. But also, no, you have responsibility for getting yourself in the vibe.
I like that part. Let's unpack that part. I think too many people are blaming their partners, like, oh, he wants too much sex, or oh, she like does this, oh, they do that. What about yourself?
Yeah.
What about taking ownership?
Yes. And that's one of the myths that I think we have out there, that our partner is responsible for our desire and for our arousal. And I mean, ideally in a partnership, you both get to, you play that role with each other. But particularly in long-term relationships, it's super common for the neurochemicals of desire to have dropped for one or both partners. And it's like, oh, okay, if we miss this and we still want an active sex life, we need to reframe how we approach this. One, we need to maybe read books, or we need to seek, professional work. But basically what you need to do is create some kind of structure. Because that's what happens. People say they want to work on it and change, but then life happens. And so if they don't have the accountability and structure of weekly meetings with their partners, where they're maybe checking in and working on topics, so you can create your own weekly check-ins, or seeing a coach, a counselor, a therapist, somebody who's giving you accountability and homework that you're working on. Because otherwise this is always going to get put on the back burner for the low desire person. So then part of that work is, okay, what does make me feel turned on? Or maybe once a month, if you're not on the pill and you ovulate, you might naturally feel horny. Oh, okay. How do we literally look ahead to our calendars and plan date nights around that? And then and then make sure you're in the headspace and you create an environment where you can have sexy time together. So you can't wait for it to happen because it's not happening, And so what do you do to take responsibility for that? And there's a lot of different components of that. One of the new things that I love that's just out in the past couple of years is the audio erotic stories, like on various apps like Dipsy and such, and Furly, I think, has it now. That is amazing, because for so many women that I've worked with over the years, if they could just listen to a well done, well acted erotic story while they're driving home from work or from the grocery store or whatever, doing stuff around the house, that stuff's hot. I remember early COVID, like we had just been shut down and I was single and I live alone. And I was like, I got a free trial so I could share it with people. I think it was Dipsy. And I started listening to it and I was like, oh my God, this is hot. I don't want to listen to this now when we're all in shutdown. How is this helpful? I mean, I could go masturbate, but this is like stirring up something much deeper inside of me.
Oh yeah. So I love erotica, especially audibles, listening to stories. It's hot.
It's really good. I think that I am pushing now, like every time I talk about this topic with women, I am being like, seek this out, because I really think this is going to help women in long-term relationships who are struggling with low desire a lot.
So, I love that. Yeah. So recently I chatted with another professor of sexuality, and we started talking about how, if you feel like low sexual desire, maybe stimulate yourself and have sex anyways, because sex can help stimulate more sex.
However, what I'm going to say is don't just have sex anyway, because that creates obligation. That can also, if it's painful or uncomfortable, you're going to then create a negative connection to sex around that, and you're going to feel more averse to it. What I would say though is it is really valuable to know that desire doesn't always come first. So if you can create a context with your partner who you love and who you trust,
Yeah.
And start being physical together and then maybe sexual together, but in a way that feels good to you, that doesn't feel like a violation.
Right.
Then your body can get turned on and you get you start feeling aroused, and then your desire will kick in. So I would say, I think when people hear that advice, which I've heard so many times over the years, and I think Christian populations are often more likely to say that also. That can cause so much resentment in women. And then you feel like you're being violated also. Like there's nothing. However, getting started sexually, not like anything that's like feels like hardcore jumping into sex, but getting your body warmed up sexually, like all of what we call quote unquote foreplay, which is terribly named because it's really some of the best stuff. Like playing with all of that in a way that you're connecting with your partner, you're going slow, you're getting out of your head and you're present in your body. And then your body can start to relax and open up to arousal. And then it can open up to desire also. But you need to feel comfortable in all of that, you can shut it down you don't want to do it out of obligation.
Right.
You want to be open to connecting in ways, even if that horniness isn't there initially.
Yeah. So like, I mean, that's exactly what I meant is get started anyways.
Yes.
Because there are times where I'm quite overwhelmed with life, like life stuff, work, family, this and that. And maybe like, we're in the bedroom and my partner is horny and wants to have sex, but I'm like so tight and tense from the day. I try to relax my body, started talking about like, so what's our weekend plan? I was like, oh, I think I want to grab my vibrator. And he's like, yeah, go for it. And so I grab my vibrator. I, take charge of my own like desire. And, from that, like really tight, like my shoulders and neck was tight. And I'm like, my day was just so hectic. I had to get myself into that feeling. And then of course he's rubbing my legs and like helping me get into the mood and the vibe. Then for a while, then I can start having more started to like make out, and maybe he'll go down on me, and then maybe not, we have penetrative sex. But what I was saying was that first initial part is like such a pivotal moment of people starting to get feeling sensual or not.
Yes.
And I think too many times
open to it and not just a no.
And I think too many times people just shut that down. Just like, I'm stressed. Goodbye.
Yes. And yes, absolutely.
I think that's a big problem.
And I think to realize that there's, I when I talk to folks who are the lower desire ones and they're like, God, I say no all the time. I just say no automatically now without even thinking. And I was like, I help them play with neutral. What if you just, instead of being a negative or assuming this is going to be a negative or that you don't like this, what if you just play with neutral, which gives you then curiosity, which gives you presence, which gives you, questioning and hopefully the opportunity for connection. Like, are you open to connecting with your partner? Maybe you're a no to what you think specifically sexually they want to do, but are you open to connecting in some way? And that's like that 0 to 5 that you can play with. You're like, oh, I'm only like, I'm not a 0 because I do want to connect with my partner. But I'm like a 1 or a 2, but let us give us some space for this. And let me think, what do I need to do to take responsibility for this also? And then also know there's times that you're a 0 and you're a no, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But check in if that is your default and your partner really connects through sex and intimacy, that's going to be a problem in the long run because their needs aren't being met. So
what would be your advice to people that are like, I've been a 0 for years?
I mean, there's lots of things. I mean, you could go, one thing, you could get hormone tested and you could check that out. I mean, depending on where you are, if you're perimenopause or menopausal, certainly if women after if they've had a full hysterectomy or something like that, they could be, so there, I mean, so my first question would be like, what's going on medically?
Right.
What's going on
could
physically?
be,
How old are you? Because those factors matter a lot. And some of those are a lot harder to overcome than others.
But if it's a younger person and they got tested and everything and there's no physical medical problem.
Yeah. And if there's nothing like that, I then would also find out, like, did they ever actually enjoy sex? because I've worked with folks before that they're like, they had their hot and heavy phase at the beginning of their relationship, but they actually never sought it out really for pleasure. They sought it out for love and connection. And because they knew their partner wanted it and they connected, but they never actually really loved sex. So that's an interesting thing to unpack of like, first of all, they may just be a naturally really low desire person or more asexual, and actually not be really wired towards that. Or maybe they carry a lot of shame or embarrassment around sexual topics that they learned growing up, or they think their body's broken in some way. And then I'd talk about, it would be exercises around masturbation. Like what really does feel good to you? What does bring you pleasure? And starting with taking responsibility for yourself. And then, and then all of the components we've talked about so far, then putting all of that into action of regular weekly check-ins with your partner. So you're talking about this topic and it's not getting brushed under the rug anymore. There's just so many different angles to take, but it needs to be consistent. You need to work on yourself. You need to work on communication with your partner, and then consistent, and accountability, because that's the only way we make any personal growth change. And it's hard and awkward and uncomfortable, but all the best things are around personal growth.
Yes. And I mean, granted, if you're lucky, you live till you're 80, 90, 100, like, are you going to not know yourself and have mediocre sex for the rest of your life?
I know. And that's the thing. If you're really committed to your partner, also, if you're like married or if you're in a long-term relationship and you want to stay with this person, like it behooves you to at least try to make it more pleasurable for yourself.
For yourself and for your partner. Yeah,
instead of just doing something out of obligation. So, but there can be a lot of layers of resentments and body image concerns. And I mean, and this is, it's, desire is a tough topic. Like we don't understand it well. If we did, we don't have pills to take it. And none of the pharmaceuticals out there work well for women's desire because it's so complicated and beautifully complex. But to circle it back, that's why sexual mindfulness matters so much, because the more we know ourselves and are attuned to ourselves and feel a sense of agency and self-worth, the more pleasure we're going to have, because we're just going to be able to attune to ourselves and to attune to partners better.
Yeah. As a person, mindfulness practices has, influenced me in the most positive way in various aspects of life, including sex. Like I've been feeling more and more and more empowered to take ownership on my own pleasure, on how I view myself, on my sexuality, on how I communicate about my sexual desires and wants and needs. So I think the really first step, and I just wish more people would adopt the practices. The really first step is that mindfulness.
Yeah. And I would say, depending on if you have a history of trauma and sexual trauma and stuff, I would say don't start this on your own.
Right.
I would say do it with a coach, a counselor, or therapist, or some maybe group support setting, something like that, because you could definitely, your nervous system can definitely get dysregulated depending on what you're unpacking.
Right. And it could be like a tumultuous path.
Yeah. And it can trigger and bring up too much in a way that's not, I mean, because we always, I like to play with that picture of like, we've got our comfort zone in the center of like, of this circle of where we're comfortable. And then you've got this big circle outside around it of like sort of what's possible. And generally when we're doing personal growth, we just want to be in this circle that's just outside of our comfort zone. That it's not too far out that we like have nervous breakdowns or we dissociate or triggers us too much, but we've got to be uncomfortable.
Right.
And like, that's where the juiciness and the magic in sex and relationships and life happens.
Oh, I 100% support that message.
It takes courage to do so.
It does. And vulnerability.
And personal responsibility.
Yeah. But I love that. Like, push yourself, but be gentle.
Yes. It is. Yeah. It is kind of like, well, I always say when folks are like, meditating, whatever, I go, put 10 minutes of meditation in your calendar. Get your ass on the cushion, no matter what. That accountable. Now, what happens in that 10 minutes? Be kind to yourself. Try to stay focused.
We're all trying.
Some days you'll feel like you drop into a space or you're focused on your bed. Some days you're distracted the entire 10 minutes. That's okay. Be kind and compassionate towards yourself. but have the accountability to keep showing up and practicing it and doing it.
Yes. I love that. So I have a few guided sexual meditation for individuals and couples on YouTube. And I've been really getting really good feedback about, well, it's easier to be guided with like different sexual stuff, especially exploring this like meditative state and breath work with your partner. So it's really cool.
Good.
This has been an amazing, educational, and engaging conversation. Before you go, I always play a game with my guests before they leave, and it's called 10 Quickies with Dr. Tara.
Okay.
So the quickies are I'm going to give you one word, and you just give me your first response. It could be a word, it could be a sentence, or a few sentences.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, Dr. Jen. Number 1, sloppy kisses. Or it can just be noises. Number 2, BDSM.
I know. You're getting very like visceral responses from me.
Ooh, what do you think about this? Number 3, saying I love you on a first date.
Ill-advised. Poor boundaries. Honestly, that's what comes to mind. Yeah.
Number 4, prolonged eye contact.
Vulnerable.
Number 5, polyamorous relationships.
Expanding is the first word that came to mind. Difficult, but expanding.
Yes. Number 7, tantric sex.
First place I went was yoni and lingam. Yeah.
Number 8, foreplay.
The best stuff.
Yeah. Number 9, sexual desire.
Complicated and juicy.
And number 10, tell us, Dr. Jen, enthusiastic consent.
Oh God, that's a whole nother podcast.
I know.
I mean, the goal, but not what most people practice.
Right, the goal.
So yeah, I mean, because that is, when I talk to college campuses, I was like, I know this is the law or this is the goal, but this is research is showing most of you aren't doing this at all. So we need to play with this whole gray area where y'all are having sex. So yeah, those are great. That was totally fun. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for making the time. Any plugs before you go?
I mean, if folks are interested in my stuff, my main hub for all my stuff is drjensden.com. You can see my TEDx talks, a really personal consent talks that I have there. All my In the Den with Dr. Jen YouTube videos, my podcast, my book, all of it's there. But yeah, if this resonated, please, and find me on social media because I've been doing this for a long time, but I feel like now I'm so excited to see that you're doing research in this. I was like, oh my God, this is like happening now. I've been like plugging along at this for so long. So
and I have to share it with you.
Yes. Oh yeah. Oh, I am excited. So yeah, no, if folks like what I'm doing, please find me online and join in the conversation.
Awesome. I will have Dr. Jen's information and links in this episode's description. Well, my loves, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for listening to Luvbites by Dr. Tara podcast. I am so appreciative of you. Have an orgasmic day.
Thanks for listening. This was Love Bites. Love Bites by Dr. Tara. Follow Dr. Tara on social media at lovebites.co. Have an orgasmic day.